Welcome to the live stream of the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Today on the live stream, we're joined by Cesar Zuñiga, candidate for City Council in Brooklyn's 38th District. We're going to talk with Cesar about why he is running and what issues he would like to take on should he become our next council member. Cesar, welcome to the stream.
Hey, man. How are you? It's good to see you, brother.
I'm good. Thank you. How are you doing?
Hanging in there, just like all of us. I almost don't like the question because I think we're all we've seen better days. So,
yeah,
ahí estamos.
Estamos, correct. And, normally under different circumstances, we would be in person, in studio, and a different vibe. And this medium actually for me and for the podcast is kind of new because everything we're doing is now remote. So, here we are, but I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that the viewers are here. And, before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And you can find this over at www.sunsetyoutube.com. And so tell us, Cesar, how long have you been in Sunset now?
So since 2009, actually.
Okay. And since then, I think you've been active in the community, right? When did you decide to run, and what motivated you to run?
Absolutely. So, I think when we spoke the last time in 2014, I had the response to the question is similar to now, which is it's a process, right? I've never made it a secret that I wanted to serve the public. That's been kind of what I've done since a young age, and almost through my work is another way of looking at this idea of working for the public. So this idea of running for office is been something that I've tossed around for a few years. But I also have a life and a career, and so just like in the last time I ran, this time around I had to think really long and hard and really figure out if it was the right time. And that decision was made a couple months ago after the pandemic really changed a lot of things for me personally and my family. We had the fire last year, and again, life gets in the way of a lot of plans. But again, I sort of waited out and had some conversations with people who are close to me, and I decided to do this a couple of months ago. And so to answer the question about why, I think a lot of what we're experiencing currently with everything that's going on in the world, in the country, in the community, I feel like we need strong leadership. And I feel very confident, and I feel that I've demonstrated to have strong leadership. And I think, again, now more than ever, we need leaders who are going to be present, who are going to be transformative, and who are really going to try to bring community together and be engaged in the civic process.
Now, you ran a few years ago for assembly.
Yeah.
And you didn't win. How difficult was it to take on that loss? Like what was going through your mind?
Yeah.
And we actually haven't had a chance to talk since that election,
right.
At least on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'd like for you to give us a sense of what it was like, campaigning for all those months.
Yeah.
And then you get to the election night and it doesn't go your way. What do you feel inside? What's going on in your mind?
It's a gut punch. It's a real gut punch. Particularly, again, there's context to everything, right? And the first thing that I would say is running for office is hard, and I learned that a long time ago. Some folks do it for certain reasons. Some folks who don't run but see it from the outside think it's glamorous or somehow like about ego or whatever, but it's hard. It's hard work. There are things that you have to do if you really want to have a shot of winning that require you to be away from your family, that require you to be very present. And also you're putting yourself out there for a community to sort of pass a judgment about whether or not they want to give you a job, and whether they or not they want you as the leader to represent them. So it was hard. It was hard because we worked really hard. We felt that we were running for the right reasons. We had an assembly member, and he's now been defeated very soundly, who, in our opinion and in the opinion of a lot of folks, needed to sort of go. We needed new leadership. We needed a fresh vision for the neighborhood. And I think we talked about all of those things in that campaign, about the affordable houses crisis, the need to create jobs, the need to support our small businesses, and all of the immigration issues that at that time were different, but nevertheless were issues that we talked about. So it was hard. It was no party that night. It was again, the best way that I could describe it was a gut punch, because we put so much into it, and we came up short. I mean, I'm super proud of what we did, given our first time out in this context, and some of the metrics that we achieved: 29% of the vote. We raised some money. We knocked on a whole bunch of doors, and we really got people engaged. So I'm really proud of that. But obviously, the plan A was to win.
Sure. And how do you lift yourself up from a defeat and continue to keep going? Because there's a lot of people throughout the years that have run for office, and they run for office, and they don't get to the position they were seeking, and we never hear from them again. You lost that particular election, but you kept going in the community, and I think I saw you 2 days after the election out and about doing community work. So how do you keep going? Like, I know if I took a defeat like that, I'd be down and out for some time, and but you kept going. So what kept you going after such a public defeat, right? Because these things are public. Everyone knew, it was reported in all the papers and all the local papers. Everyone knows, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep going?
Good. I mean, that's a great question. For me, I think it was. I had a pity party the night of the election. I was really down and upset and feeling super depressed. And but I figured out very quickly, perhaps the next morning or the day after that it's not about me. We go out there, we present our case, if you will. We ask voters to make a decision. And so for me, it wasn't about that election, or it wasn't about that office, right? For me, I think the thing that I like to remind folks is the office holding is not the thing that I have as a primary way of making my way in life. Like, I have a career, I do it, I did it, and I continue to do it because I really genuinely believe in public service. I genuinely believe in giving back to the community. And so I had to sort of just shake it off and say, you know what, keep going. This isn't about you and this election. It's about, having this commitment to really being part of a community and working for that community. And that's what I've done since that defeat. I've just sort of put my head down and continued to do the community's work, because that's what it's about. It's not about me.
Now, so let's touch now on, I guess, a few of the issues that seem to be coming up in the neighborhood. And it seems like we can't talk about Sunset Park without mentioning the waterfront. And that's like a big topic that keeps coming up in the local news, and just people out and about in the street. When you hear conversations about the neighborhood, the waterfront always comes up.
Yeah.
Now, the community is still feeling that high from that victory on the rezoning of Industry City.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get an idea of what your position was on the rezoning prior to this win. Were you for it? Were you against it? What was your position on that?
Okay, so a couple of things. Again, lots of context, right? So I went into the whole process with a very kind of like intentional recognition that, as a community board chair, I had a very specific role to play. And very early on, people were trying to uh, on either side of the whole conversation, the people who were for it and who were saying it's going to be the best thing that could ever happen to Sunset Park, and then the people who were against the idea. I think there were folks who were basically pressuring me to utilize my role as chair, sort of tip the scales one way or the other. And I firmly believe, particularly because, again, even on the board membership, like there were people very early on who were like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's get this passed. And there were people who also were like, no, this is not something that we should just jump into so lightly. And so I heard that very clearly. So my position was that I wanted to create a space so that there could be a conversation about what would happen in this particular ULIP process. So I tried very hard to stick to that space, to like really just creating a conversation where I didn't want to sort of be perceived as, oh yeah, this guy's totally for it and everything that he's doing is about making this happen. And I didn't want to sort of give the other impression either, which is, oh, this guy's totally against it. He's trying to utilize his influence and power, whatever limited influence and power, to block it. I was very consistent about that. I think all of the actions that we took on the community board reflect that we were intentional about creating this space to have people have a conversation about it. Now, from my personal perspective, the application as written was flawed from the beginning, and I had no doubt about that. What I had hoped. And I'm not beyond saying that I made a mistake or that I was not. What I had hoped was that we could get to a place where we could really effectuate changes to the application, right? But over the time, it became really clear to me that that wasn't happening, and so I think that from the beginning, I had a real problem with the application. The fact that there were hotels in it, the fact that it was this bridled, unregulated way of this developer to just kind of like blow up that whole development, right? So I was personally hoping that make some progress on that front, but I think over time it just became clear that nothing was changing in the application, and there were all these public, pronouncements about hotels are out, hotels are this, but they were still in the application that we voted on. So in the end, that night, I voted against basically against the 4 items that they were asking us, because I couldn't vote for what was on that application. Could I maybe have voted for something different? Maybe. But we never got to that place where this developer, and frankly, the planning commission, that was the real gut punch, right? I mean, that was the real, like, when it came out of the planning commission after we did our review and absolutely nothing about the application changed, that was like, wow, okay. So, I sort of the way that I voted, the way that I sort of positioned myself personally against the application was totally, justified, for lack of a better word. And so again, I want to be clear though that I took very seriously the idea of creating a context where we were, as a community, talked about what we wanted to see in that application. Now, we can have a debate about, how successful we were, but there's no question in my mind that we were very intentional and very much about the spirit of creating a community conversation about that particular rezoning process.
Yeah, it was definitely a hot topic that I think was dividing the community, because there was a lot of people that were against it, but there was a lot of people that were for it, right? And some of the things that I heard from the people that were for it are like, I own a house, and if the rezoning goes through, then my property value is going to go up.
Yeah, I heard that too. Absolutely.
And then things like, well, there's a lot of nice things going on down there, so you can just kind of walk, and they have all these different events, concerts, events for kids, and family events and stuff like that. So I found it to be such a very divisive topic, right? And there's still some people that after they pulled their application are upset, right? So the thing is that Industry City promised or were offering things to entice the community to get, behind their application. Things like particularly jobs, right? And a bunch of other things. But do you think that we can get the things that they were trying to entice the community with without Industry City? Is that something that we can go out and get on our own? Like, can we bring jobs to the community without having to depend on Industry City, for example?
Yeah, I absolutely think we can bring jobs to the neighborhood, and with or without Industry City, or including Industry City. Look. The reality is that, unlike Amazon, Industry City is there now. Can they create jobs? The jury's still out on that now. Or some would argue that they have created jobs right now. And do they want to make all of these promises? Okay, that's their prerogative to do that. What we have to do is make sure that we build the accountability mechanisms to make certain that those promises are being fulfilled. So that's one thing on the IC side. But let's put them in the parking lot, because I think this, and I want to remind folks, this is just one player among many along the waterfront. So to answer your question, can we bring jobs? Absolutely. This is one of the things that I want to do as the district's legislator, is to really work to make and find those opportunities. And I think, anyone who is paying attention to anything that's going on in terms of job development and creation and economic development, is that there's a real potential to do this within the context of green energy jobs, right? And so there are lots of possibilities that I think we have been so focused on this IC thing that we haven't really been thinking about in much bigger picture terms, right? And that's part of what I hope that we can, as a community, just like, the waterfront is such an asset. It is such an asset to this neighborhood, to the region, and we have an obligation as a community to really figure out how to not only make that asset work for the local community, which is the top of the priority, but also how do we make it work for a region. We live in a context. Context is everything, right? So it's not like Sunset Park and Red Hook is in some like bubble. It is part of a much larger context, and I think the waterfront is a real gem and a real asset for all of us.
Yeah, and also it attracts a lot of developers, right? I think developers are salivating at the opportunity to develop down there, and the fear is also the development there can bring gentrification to the neighborhood. And then there's that same two different sides, right? Where there's people that are like okay with gentrification,
yeah,
because they somehow feel that it's going to make the neighborhood better, if you will.
Yeah.
And then there are those who fear being priced out, not
Yep.
being able to afford to live here. And it's a really tough question, right? Do we slow down gentrification? Can we even slow down gentrification? Or do we just let things develop how they come, and that's just life in Brooklyn? Like, what, if anything, can we do to kind of help slow down gentrification, if even possible?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And frankly, you just reminded me, in 2014, I wrote an op-ed in one of the local papers about the waterfront not being for sale. And one of the things that I wrote, one of the sentences, is that developers are salivating to come in to our neighborhood. So that's not something new. I mean, this is something that we've known and has happened and is going to continue to happen. To answer your question very directly, do we just let development happen and just kind of watch and let it go? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We work like hell to make sure that we slow gentrification down, or we stem it in some way or form, right? And the solution is not simple. It's not some magic bullet. It's not just let's I don't know, build, or let's, preserve affordable housing. I mean, all of those things have to happen, and all of these sort of moving pieces need to be part of how to manage gentrification and development, right? So I don't agree that we should just let development happen and just watch it and sit idly by. And another piece of that puzzle is to really build the community's capacity to be part of these conversations. And that's another commitment that I've had as chair, and I think, again, we've demonstrated that in many ways, that we need to get more people engaged and involved in the process. And we need to do some very basic things to build people's capacity, whether it's language access, whether it's creating context where people are meaningfully going to be able to participate in these conversations. I mean, some folks think that you check the box of community engagement by showing up, doing a PowerPoint presentation, and somehow expecting that that's going to be meaningful to folks. I mean, it's particularly in a community like ours that's so diverse, you have to really work hard to do the kind of engagement that's going to be meaningful to folks who have completely different priorities, like, providing for their families and working, jobs. And so I think all of that stuff really needs to be part of how we address this idea of gentrification and how we manage development.
Yes, because a lot of people who are in favor of development feel that those that are against gentrification are against development, right? But I think it's not necessarily that people who are against gentrification are against development, but maybe a more responsible way of developing, if that's even possible. And some people feel that there's just no way of slowing gentrification, right? Or that it's just inevitable.
Yeah.
And I don't know personally, because it just keeps happening in different parts of the city, if it's something that can be slowed down. Like, I don't know what can be done at the city council level to slow this down. Or is it even realistic to assume that a council member can put or propose measures to slow down gentrification?
Well, so again, and that's a fair question. It's gentrification is a complicated idea, right? It's not, it sort of intersects development, like development projects. It intersects the loss of affordable housing stock. It intersects with a whole bunch of sort of variables, right? And I think there are things that city council members, even if it's just in sort of the context of rezonings, right? Like, I think one of the real nice net positive things that's come out of this particular process with the city is that we now have an opportunity to like really engage stakeholders at the city level to think about a more of a community-led way of rezoning, not just one small piece of land, but like we have, again, this whole waterfront that has multiple players and actors that we can, again, create the conditions where instead of looking at these one-off sort of ways of rezoning the land, that we do this in a more comprehensive way. And that can happen not just in the case of the waterfront, which is all industrial, and that's how it should stay, but it can happen with how we rezone other parts of the community that could be targeted toward residential. So I do think that depending on what you're talking about related to managing development and or managing gentrification, that the city council plays a huge role in some of those processes. Mm-hmm. But let me just say this, though. I do think that specifically if we're talking about housing and the development of new housing, there is no way to get it done just at the city council level. We need the state government and we need the federal government. No questions. No, I mean, I'm sorry. You can't convince me otherwise that for the housing development of housing specifically, especially affordable housing, you need to have the city council, the state, and the federal government.
Yeah, and I think they have to figure out a way to work together, and something that just historically doesn't seem to happen often, especially now with this federal government in place. There's just a huge disconnect. But another topic that keeps coming up in the neighborhood is policing. Right? And historically, the community has had issues with police and them being extremely excessive with force. At times, it seems like our local precinct has been a dumping ground, if you will, of other officers who have committed acts of police brutality in other precincts, and they like drop them off here, right? So, what, if anything, can we do to help mend that fragile relationship between the community and our local precinct?
So we have to reform. We have to reform policing. I mean, I think there's been a lot of good energy around having conversations about reforming policing and reforming our concepts of public safety, right? And so for me, I think the community policing is one small part of it. But again, all of these things are very complicated, and it's not one thing or the other or some magic bullet. I think when we talk about this whole notion of defunding the police, it really, for me, resonates in a deep way, because part of what I've dedicated my whole career in sort of the preventative services kind of world is, where are our priorities? Where we're funding police departments to do something that falls squarely in the context of preventative services. So early childhood services, the safety net that should be a lot more robust than it is for children and families. The safety net that revolves around mental health, social services. I think, when we talk about defunding the police and creating context and communities to not have these types of neighborhoods that are like ours, that are over policed, and that are, that have created some super violent and unfortunate incidents. I think, again, it's part of a much bigger conversation about how we need to rethink how we're funding the police, and where and how we need to sort of reallocate some of those resources and reallocate just some of our priorities, frankly, right? And I think, again, part of a much bigger conversation that intersects a lot of different other ideas, right? So whether it's the not just the over policing, but the the disproportionate incarceration of men of color, particularly African American men, whether it's a conversation about, again, preventative and investing early in life to like really give people opportunities. I mean, it's all of these conversations, and it's way past due in a place like New York City to have those conversations. And I'm not an expert in police tactics, but I know enough to know that we have used some pretty awful police tactics in this city that we need to call out, and we need to make sure that people understand that they have rights, and that just because a cop is afraid of you because you're black or you're brown and decides to like create some kind of a situation where it quickly escalates is something that is preventable if people understood that they have rights, and we need to be doing a better job of making sure that people know what those rights are, and calling out some of the police tactics that are despicable.
Yeah, you touched on something with regards to prioritizing resources. I've seen these crazy statistics where I believe last year the police department, NYPD, receives $6 billion from taxpayers a year, right? And if you were to combine what schools receive, what hospitals receive, and this pandemic definitely, without a doubt, exposed all that, right?
Yeah.
Our hospitals were in terrible situations with not having equipment, not having personnel, not having so many different things that were needed to take care of people who were there for COVID. And of course, our educational system is in terrible shape as well. And if you were to combine what is allocated for those institutions, for social services, for healthcare, for even infrastructure, it doesn't even come close to $6 billion a year. I think now they're getting 5, right?
Yeah.
But it is, a regular person thinking that it's just borderline criminal you know,
Yeah.
to not prioritize things like education, things like hospital, things like healthcare. And I don't know,
Yeah.
you know, and even what's kind of tough about all this is when council members take a stance against that, it almost seems like there's retribution
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of saw that in our own community.
Yeah.
But it's going to take
Yeah.
a council member to be fearless and to take
Yeah.
those a stand like that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, what's really egregious to me about all of this too is that we're talking about this stuff happening, and again, a city that touts itself to be one of the most progressive cities, where we have this mayor who came in with all of these like, you know, high hopes about his progressive like, you know, chops, and he's a community organizer and all, you know, that's what he claimed, that he's, you know, he's always been from like, you know, the grassroots up, and those were just talking points, clearly, because you have what you just described, where our priorities are so skewed that we're funding, you know, like you just pointed out, police departments at a significantly higher rate than we would our education system or our social service kind of infrastructure. But it's also like, you have to know, it's a cultural thing, I think, in this country, right? Because look at the military. I mean, we spend, and I, you know, I like data and real facts, but I think we spend like, you know, more on our military than the next 8, you know, developed nations in the world. That's staggering. And the fact that I think, so that mentality, that over policing, over militarized mentality of that's got to be funded at, you know, record levels, because that's really what matters. That's what keeps us safe. And, you know, you have all of these like strange for me narratives about why we should continue to have these priorities that seem so just backward to me. And you know, I think it's part of that whole bigger conversation about, we have to get our priorities set and we have to get them straight.
Yeah. So we've touched on a few different issues that affect the community and that keep coming up over and over again. But if you were to become our next council member, which of any of these, or if there's anything that we haven't touched on, you feel needs to be addressed immediately when you start the first day in office?
Well, for sure, the idea of housing. I mean, I think that has been and continues to be one of the most pressing issues that we have in Sunset Park and in the district, in Red Hook, especially, you know, in those, especially in those parts of the neighborhood. There is a real crisis of affordable housing, and you know, for me, like, we have to kind of get cracking with that, because again, it's not a simple fix. It's not a simple fix, and it's something that's going to require a whole bunch of folks in the community to come together and to like make some tough decisions about how we stem the whole crisis of affordable housing. And everything is on the table, from building to preserving, right? And figuring out how to bring in some of the other, again, government partners, whether it's at the state or the federal level, to come in and be part of this conversation. I think the other sort of pressing thing that is a direct result of the pandemic is job creation and economic development, right? Like, we have to, again, have some serious conversations about how we want to proceed on that front, where, you know, because it again, you know, presumably at some level there's going to have to be some type of development to create jobs and to sustain jobs. Presumably there's going to be some kind of conversation. There needs to be some kind of conversation about the role that, again, rezonings can have in this conversation around creating jobs and doing development in the community. So again, we already had a conversation that was extremely passionate, if you will, that was extremely that really animated our community to come and like voice their opinions. We have to continue to have those conversations because we're not done yet. We really are, this whole thing that we just did with Industry City is just a part of what our future is, which is to, like, again, manage all of the problems, if you see them as problems. And I think most of us see gentrification as a huge problem that requires a lot of action. So I think job creation, economic development, the housing, as a dad of school-age kids in the public schools, I think also there's a lot of work that needs to get done there, particularly within the space of special education. That's something that I'm going to be talking a lot more about. And so I think really those are the sort of the ideas that I have in my head. But I think part of also doing a campaign is listening to people and asking people and figuring out, some of the other sort of priorities that the community has in mind. So that's the other thing that I intend to do very carefully and intentionally is really listen to all parts of the district, to like really try to figure out, what do we do, like, immediately? What are, I'm a planner. That's kind of how I operate. Like, what are some of the short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals of the district? And part of that planning process requires that I listen.
Yeah, and we have a Facebook comment. And so you were talking about housing, and the comment is that food insecurity, right? They feel it's just as important. This pandemic exposes that people who lost their jobs, who were furloughed or laid off. I mean, the city was basically shut down for 3 months, and there was people that were just not working for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so housing and I guess food, and according to this comment, go together. Do you agree with that? They go.
Absolutely. I mean, look, here's, and sometimes I need to pull back because I get sucked into a rabbit hole of a very specific topic or issue. We need to do better around the safety net that we offer children and families. Period. End of story. And the safety net is not one thing or the other. It's a whole array of services and support systems that children and family need. So I think, food insecurity, certainly healthcare, housing, these are basic, needs that we need to make sure that every single one of our citizens in the district have some real solutions, some real possibilities to live their best lives, right? And if you're food insecure, if you're wondering where you're going to live, if you're not going to be able to live a healthy life that we all deserve to live.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about a lot of serious issues, right? But I want to lighten it up a little bit. And so we have like a really full competitive race with really great people running, people who, like yourself, have a history in the community of being out there, working, chipping in to make this place the best possible place to live, to raise a family, to have friends. And in general, like, we have lots of issues, but I still believe the district and Sunset Park is a great place to live. I'm raising a family here. You're raising a family here.
Yeah.
Now, if Cesar wasn't running, and you had to back one of the other candidates, who would that be?
That's a great question. Look, so I want to be very clear because Cesar is running, and I'm going to compete, and I'm going to, my plan is to win, and we have a plan to do that. But if I weren't running, and of the candidates that I know well, it would be Alexa. I mean, I would give her a good look because I've worked with her. I think she's a super committed person. Super intelligent, obviously, and so I feel, if I weren't running, I think that's someone that I've gotten to know over the years. We've worked closely on the community board, so. But again, I am running, and I'm not endorsing anyone other than Cesar.
Sure. So because you're running, right, and you made that very clear, why should we vote for Cesar?
So I think For for a few reasons. I think I come from a place where a family that taught me values that I think are important in leadership, and that's to take care of one another, to take care of folks who are less fortunate, and folks who are your neighbors, and so I think my personal values, I think the professional work that I've done really are the things that are going to inform the kind of legislator that I want to be. And so, like, my professional work is focused on, again, children and families, and making sure that we advocate for a strong safety net, and we advocate for having public policies that are really going to make a difference in the lives of communities. So I bring my personal values, my professional experiences. I also feel like I demonstrated a style of leadership that I think is going to benefit the community, and that's been to listen to folks, to bring people together, even when we don't have converging opinions or views. And I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to continue to offer that kind of leadership that, again, if you're in leadership, I think you have a responsibility to be transformative, to be sort of transparent, and to also be someone that can bring people together, that can really foster and bring collaboration and cooperation within the context of a community. And I think that's what I've demonstrated, and I'm going to continue to demonstrate that as we move forward in the campaign.
Cesar, this was a lot of fun. It was great speaking with you about the issues in the community. I think it's refreshing that we have so many people stepping up to want to represent us. I think that at the council level, it's as local as you get, and you're right there. Our council member is our direct liaison to the city, to the mayor, and it's important that we have someone there that is truly there to care for us, to represent us, to be a leader in our community. And it's inspiring that we have all these local leaders wanting this position. And I want to thank you for taking the time, being here this afternoon, conversating with us. We'd love to talk with you again as we get closer to the election, to see how things are coming along, and talk about other issues that might come up down the line, because it's going to be super interesting what happens in November with the general presidential election. And depending on that, it might change the whole parameter of everything, and we'd love to have you back and talk some more.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. I'm always happy to see you, always happy to talk, and thank you for creating these spaces, right? Because I think we all need to be held accountable, and we all need to kind of like make clear to the folks, why are we doing this? What can you expect? And so I really appreciate that you're creating these spaces. So anytime, nomás me hablas, and I'm there.
Claro que sí. Muchas gracias.
Órale.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We will be back here next week with another great local guest. I want to again remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. As you see, this is a new medium for us, because normally we would do strictly an audio podcast, but the world has changed and we are now doing live streams. And then in a couple of days, the audio podcasts will be available at all the regular podcast channels. So again, thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week. Have a great evening.